Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another How the Grandmasters Do It. This time, it's Battlefield of Eternity. I'm Ishbu, and once again, I'm here to provide you a high-level just explanation of how Grandmasters approach the Battlefield of Eternity. Now, disclaimer, Heroes of the Storm is a game with a lot of different strategies, and Battlefield of Eternity is especially the case with this. There are a lot of different ways to play this map. I'm just going to try and give you a little bit of insight into the various options you have on this map when approaching it. And that's both for your own gameplay or if you just want to watch high-level players and understand what's going through their heads. Now, quickly jumping into it, Battlefield of Eternity is a well-rounded two-lane map that's home to many different strategies. Fast, decisive rotations and high DPS heroes are the keys to taking the lead. Now, unlike the previous couple maps I've done, this isn't really a early game or late game map. This is a map that is pretty well rounded from start to finish. You can win if you're behind, but it also gives you a lot of opportunity to snowball if you're ahead. So go ahead and you're going to have to make a lot of decisions on the fly when it comes to this map. So this guide is going to be very limited in that regard, but I'm going to try and give you the options anyways. So, first things first, prioritize heroes that burn the objective fast. The team that burns the objective, the Immortals first, and fastest will get to decide the pace of the game. If they want to go burn, the enemy team has to answer them and defend, and that's a huge advantage. Don't, however, pick heroes that rely on minions or globes to stack. Now, this is your Nazebos, your Kael'thas's, even a little bit your Diablos, though I think Diablo is playable on this map just due to his level 4 talents. But characters that struggle with this type of thing, that really need globes, aren't going to get their globes in time to really be meaningfully impactful on this map due to the only 2 lanes. Now, do create side lane pressure to create conflicts of interest. We've covered this in previous maps, but this is especially relevant here. You're going to see a lot of camps pushing down lanes when the Immortals spawn, just so the enemy has to split people off to answer them. And finally, and probably one of the biggest don'ts, do not wait until the objective lands to begin moving towards it. I see so many people, including my teammates in Storm League, that wait until the Immortal lands to begin running towards it. Don't do that. This map, the Immortals can get burned so fast in even just a few seconds if you're waiting for it. Whichever team gets to these Immortals faster will dictate the pace of the game. So if you can be there the second the Immortal lands, you're going to be the one taking the advantage, and you're going to be the one that always needs to be answered, rather than the one always answering the opponent. Now, moving into some heroes, you'll see I talked about fast burn, and all these heroes at the top are some of the fastest burners in the game. The only exception is, of course, Sylvanas, but Sylvanas gets a pass because her trait lets her use the Immortal push so much better than other heroes. She burns pretty well, but more importantly, once she activates trait on the fort, the Immortal will get a lot more value than it usually does. Second category is harassers. Now, these people, it's pretty much impossible to stop their burn on the Immortal. They don't burn as fast as the first category, but even when they're off of the Immortal and the enemy team's trying to defend, they can often throw some very high damage poke that does it. Li Ming poke, obviously, Hanzo Scatter Arrow, Malthael E, and Murden's Sledgehammer Stormbolts will all do a lot of damage while not putting any of these characters in any sort of risk, allowing them to slowly poke down the Immortal. Now, speaking of hard to track down characters like these, the Squirrels, this is a map where Squirrels and high mobility characters are going to excel. My team used to have a comp we called Squirrel Comp where we just picked 5 of these heroes. But the short of it is the map is most of the fighting happens very far away from forts and happens in wide open areas with a lot of vents and a lot of flanking angles, meaning high mobility characters love this map. That's your Genjis, your Tracers, even your Illidan's and your Zeratools. Now, you want to partner these type of characters with either like an Abathur or a Brightwing to support them, or tanks like a Tyrael who can jump on their targets really quickly and get away just as safely. Now, finally, if you want to run more of a kill comp, or you just want to threaten the enemy squirrels, Displacers are really good on this map because they can push people into the circles. Garrosh is especially deadly. You can't pressure an Immortal while Garrosh is sitting on it because the second the circles spawn, he can throw you onto the circle and you're going to be stunned for twice as long. It's really dangerous. Same with Alarak. Now, first phase, typically this map is played as a 1-4 with offlaners in the top lane and 4-man in the bot lane. I will, however, tell you right now, there's not a good reason for this. Generally, this is done just because it's tradition. People just want to do the 1-4. That's just where people go. But there's no strict advantage to sending 4 people bottom. It's not like you're going to be able to pressure this camp because both sides are even. It's not like you're going to be faster to a camp or faster to pressure something. So I want to offer an alternative. Sometimes it might be better to send 2 or even 3 people top and split more like this. The reason for this being is maybe you don't win the 4-man, but maybe you have a hero like a Greymane who can go top, gank this top laner, and then go take this camp 2v1 and push with this camp. This is especially relevant if you have someone with a really good wave clear in the bot lane, so the enemy team can't get any value here 4v3. But this is all going to depend mostly on what heroes you have, how strong a 4-man you make, and how strong of a 2-man you can make. There's a lot of alternatives. For example, when we used to play HGC, sometimes we'd send 4 people top and 1 person bot instead. It all depends on what you think you're going to get the most value on, so experiment with a few different modifications. If you want to play it safe, just do the 1-4. This is what most people expect, but I do want to see more people experimenting around with variations of this, because there's not really a good reason to send 4 people bottom every single game on this map. Alright, at 2:30, this is your first camp rotation. The hard camp will spawn at 1 minute, but you want to take it about 2:30, or at least start it around 2:30, because you want this pushing at 3 minutes when the immortals spawn. Now this will push up this lane, and this will push up this lane, and this is that conflict of interest I was talking about. You want the enemy wants to all sit around here in the immortal, but if they have a hard camp pushing up here, it's going to get a lot of value. So you push the camp to make them have to split people off to answer. And once again, 2:30 is the timing to start that. Now, once the immortal phase starts, it's always going to be vertical like this. I think it's random if it's which one spawns on which side, but it's always going to be vertical. Now, my typical approach to this map is send your 4-man to your immortal first and fight like top to bottom or bottom to top. Now, the reason for this is simple. If you fight top to bottom, so the red team here fights top to bottom, if they're losing the fight, they can back up onto this immortal, whereas if they fight it from the right side here, they don't really have a great place to run. They have to go to their fort, and at this point, they're completely boxed out of this immortal area. That's really bad. So you start on your immortal and push down. Now, worth mentioning, if the enemy team is really slow, you can start on their immortal and retreat back up to yours. But generally, you want to fight this either top down or bottom up. And obviously, you've got offlaners answering the hard camps here, because these hard camps will get a lot of value if uncontested. This camp is infinite value if it's uncontested, so do send someone to answer it. Alright. The second immortal phase, while the first immortal phase is 50-50, the second immortal phase is always the same. The red immortal spawns on the blue side, and the blue immortal spawns on the red side. Now, this is a very common arrangement where you send 4 people to defend and 1 person to burn. Now, this is especially good if you have a really good burner like Greymane that's really good at burning when he's safe. Also true for like Illidan and a couple other heroes. But the main weakness to this comp is if the enemy has heroes like Li Ming or Hanzo who are really good at poking even if you're defending. Typically, though, you want to run this 4-1 when your team has lost the first burn phase. Basically, when you need to defend to stop the enemy team from winning the second burn phase because you already lost the first one. So this is what you want to do when you're behind in the burn race. When you're ahead in the burn race, you want to do the opposite. So you want to have 4 people burning the immortal because you're already winning. You know you're going to win if the enemy team just tries to burn theirs. And typically you send 1 person, usually your tank, to go harass people, scout, keep this 4-man safe, but also just go over here and stun their DPS, slow them down, keep as much shield as possible. Now obviously don't let your tank kill himself, but if the tank is like an ETC, he can sometimes go over here, push people into the stuns, and then back away safely, and that usually gives you an extra that's going to give you an extra 5% of the shields that you would have lost otherwise, and that's really big for this map because the shield phase is really good for the immortals. Finally, once you capture the immortal, the typical arrangement is to send 4 people to push with this, and this time there is a reason. The immortal, especially when it's shielded, really does need to be defended to get its push going, so sending your 4-man up here to pressure is really good, and if your offlaner can ever get an advantage, they can also rotate up to flank and get a 5v4 under the fort, which is really big and a really good way to snowball this map. So typically do send your 4-man to the immortal. There is a very good reason for this. Every once in a while there's an alternative, but it really depends heavily on your comp, and 9 times out of 10 I'd say this is better. Okay, so now that we've discussed map placements, once you finish with this first immortal phase, the map kind of just repeats from here. You go take these camps, then once the immortal's about to spawn, you go take your hard camps, you let the hards push, and then everything is as I already said. It's just immortal phase after immortal phase after immortal phase. So there's nothing really new. Everything I discussed basically cycles over and over again. Now, once you're ahead on this map, a couple ways to close out the game are, first, Defend your immortal when you're even in talent tiers and look to be aggressive when ahead. So the enemy team wants to fight you when you're even talent tiers, which means if you're on your immortal, you've got a 6th man helping you. The enemy effectively has to take a 5v6 if they want even talent tiers, and that's really big. Once you're ahead, usually you can send an offlaner to go get Soak, or even some of your other safer DPS heroes to go get Soak. You can then get your talent tier and then start pushing ahead when you have the talent tier and want your fight. 2, even when your burn is safe, send people to defend to keep as healthy as possible. I mentioned this with a 1-4, but if you send your tank over to go stall people, you can save a little bit of extra shield, and every bit of shield helps with the immortal. And finally, don't risk even number fights under the enemy immortal. A lot of teams will take 5v5 fights under the enemy immortal and just throw the game. If you are even numbers, if the enemy has all 5 people defending their immortal, you don't need to fight. Go send people to soak other waves. Go send, just sit off and poke it slowly. Be patient. You don't have to take fights under. As we said, the immortal is basically a 6-man. So if you try to fight even numbered fights, 5v5s under the immortal, you are taking a disadvantaged fight even though you're ahead, and you don't have to do that. And finally, tips for coming back when behind. As I said, the immortal shield is really valuable, so when it's pushing, it's ranged as long as the shield is there. So if you can kill the shield faster, the immortal will take a lot more damage because it's in melee form, and it'll do a lot less damage because it'll die faster. So you want to kill the immortal shields as fast as possible. 2, this map has a lot of really long rotations, a lot of vents, and a lot of spaces really far away from forts, which means it's ideal for death bushing and looking for random surprise picks. If you have a confident tank or even just assassins like Genji, this is a really good map for just sitting in brushes and looking to punish people's long rotations. 3, try to bait fights under your own immortal. We talked about this a couple times in the last section, but the immortal's a 6-man. Use them as much as possible. And finally, when the enemy team is doing a 4-1 strategy or doing any sort of defensive strategy, instead of trying to int and throw and push under the immortal and constantly risk deaths just to finish the immortal, instead go look for the one person who's burning. Very often teams will push like 4 people on defense and one just burning by himself, and that one person is often very vulnerable if you just have 2 players sneak around from behind and gank him. So these were my tips just for Battlefield of Eternity. As I said, it's a very flexible map, and you're going to see a lot of adjustments on the fly based on composition. But I hope this helped you to at least get started. Now, as always, here are my socials, and as always, if you do want some high-level Heroes of the Storm, go ahead and watch the HeroesHearthCCL at twitch.tv/HeroesHearth. But with all that said, I think we're done here. This has been Ishbu signing off, and I hope you all have a nice day. Peace out.